When I decided what my second video would be, I didn't plan it to be a game developed and published by Irem. I don't mean it as an insult, I just find the situation really funny, like a full circle joke. To be honest, it never occurred to me how would it have felt like to play a carpenter in a video game. Let's be frank, that's probably one of the last things we think of when we say video game characters. Little did I know that back in 2009, I'd be introduced to one of gaming's carpenter heroes. Welcome to my retrospective of Hammerin Hero. For this video, I'll be talking about the game while making a brief mention of the series it belongs to. I'll also be using the US version of the game. Hammerin Hero is an action platformer developed by Irem for the PSP. The game had different release dates and publishers depending on the region it was launched in. They were also released with different names for each region. I personally find them releasing the game in different titles confusing, but whatever. Anyways, if you focus on the Japanese title, it contains words from one of Irem's franchise, Daiku no Gensan, also known as Hammerin Harry. It's because Hammerin Hero is actually the 8th entry into the series. There is actually an interview done by Siliconera which confirms this, which I highly suggest you go check out as it is a fun read. Before we continue, I would like to briefly apologize to those who probably wanted a video on the Hammerin Harry instead. I wasn't actually aware about the franchise until my research for this video, nor was I aware that Hammerin Hero was a part of a franchise. I honestly thought it was a one-off game for the PSP that really stood out to me as a kid. Moving on, let's talk about the story. The game starts with introducing us to a carpenter in Beranme town called Gen Zotamura, though most people call him Gen. He fights with his trusty hammer, earning him the title Hammerin Hero. We see Gen outside of the house and running into Hyosuke Kuromoku, owner of the Kuromoku company. As per Hyosuke, he's trying to convince people to sell their lands to him, and then mentions how the company must set their sublime plan in motion. Gen doesn't like the sound of this and tries to stop Kuromoku. After the event, we go to meet Kanna, Gen's friend who, before each travel, provides Gen with a packed lunch. Gen travels to different parts of the town, meeting and saving people along the way. For example, in the city, Gen meets Dr. Parallel, evil genius for the Kuromoku company, and saves a girl named Saya Shiraishi. In the Oishi restaurant district, he encounters Dan Hapa, aka Dynamite Dan, his rival. In the Turakame TV studio, he meets Mika, whom he chases all over the place. After multiple encounters with the Kuromoku, we finally infiltrate their main headquarters and square off against Hyosuke. Upon beating him, he brushes Genzo off and states that he has an escape rocket waiting for him. However, his escape plan backfires as both him and Gen see the rocket launch into space with the kidnapped Kanna inside. Upon leaving the building, Gen panics as he sees a huge comet coming towards Earth. Gen questions Hyosuke if this is a ploy, only to be told that he can't make money if the Earth is destroyed. While thinking of a way to deal with this, Gen's dad, Genroku, arrives and shows him the Teyande X, a giant space mech. Gen uses the machine to save Kanna and destroy the comet, saving the planet. After all that, we return to the front of the house from earlier. Gen and Kanna encounter Saya, who is being followed by Hyosuke and his team. Hyosuke expresses no ill intentions this time and states that he wants to talk to his client. With Gen and Kanna confused, Saya then admits to be Kuromoku's client, stating that she hired them to attack Gen. Kuromoku admits his curiosity on the subject, asking his client about her intentions. Saya admits that the reason why all this happened was because she was in love with Gen. She admits that she really didn't like him before, but realized that there was no kind of guy like him. She got Kanna launched into space so that Kanna won't be able to taint him. Kuromoku and his team express how ludicrous and stupid the whole situation is and leaves. A few moments later, Saya's butler arrives to fetch her. It is then revealed that Saya is the heiress to the Shiraishi concern. After some final talk, Saya and her butler departs, leaving Gen and Kanna back to their normal lives. There's a lot to be said about the plot. Now, based on what I've read, the series has been known for its quirky and wacky plots, and Hammerin Hero has that part on lockdown. However, the quirky and wacky can be out of place when not pulled off properly. On one side, it can be cute, endearing, and charming. On the other, it could be simply stupid. Let's start with the outer space intro shot. For me, it's really out of place. The scene is trying to set up the story, but the way it's presented seems really outlandish. It makes it seem like this grand and epic thing, but it really isn't. Maybe it's there to drive the wackiness factor, or maybe I'm just missing something here. Another example is the story's driving factor. At first, we are led to believe that the Kuromoku company are just acting like stereotypical greedy evil company. There's nothing wrong with that considering what the series is known for. However, knowing that this was all happening because a girl has fallen in love with our protagonist? Again, this may have been done to drive home the game's wackiness, but I'd say this was pretty much hit or miss, or just plainly a miss. I mean, the fact that the characters themselves exclaim how stupid this whole thing is for them further drives the point. It may have been an attempt at comical awareness, but I think it simply falls flat. What about the plot itself? Well, the plot is really average in my opinion. Despite how negative sounding I was, I don't think the story is the worst story of all time, but it's not knocking my socks off either. It's just really meh. The only thing we had the whole story was, here's the hero, there's the villain. We have to stop them because they are doing some bad things. Then the whole Saya love story happens, and I don't think it added any substance at all. I think the story should have stuck with the stop the bad guy and showed more instances of the Kuromoku being the greedy company that they are. I say this because there's little to no cohesion for the plot either. There are times where you go to a stage and the Kuromoku has something going on, like in Beranme Town or in the Oishi restaurant district. Most of the time though, it just feels like, Kuromoku is here? Might as well stop them since I'm here. The best way I can describe how the plot is that it's similar to a slice of life anime. Now, I'm not saying slice of life animes are bad, but in the case of Hammerin Hero's story, it feels like a bland one. Let's talk about the gameplay. As mentioned earlier, the game is an action platformer. You play as Gen through 12 stages, whacking the enemies that get in your way. As simple as this sounds, there is replayability to the game. This is because you can play the stages in 4 different difficulties, and you can choose from Gen's 8 unlockable jobs and 2 extra characters. There are also some mini collectibles that you can get for playing the levels. More on these later. Before we dive deep into the game's mechanics, I want to mention that the game in its core is an arcade game. This means that the game contains mechanics that most of us are familiar with. This also means that the game can be difficult at times like most arcade games back in the day. First off, the controls. Since Hammerin Hero is an action platformer, controls are pretty standard. You can move using the D-pad or the analog stick, and jump via the X button. For attacks, square lets you do a light attack, and triangle for a heavy attack. Also, depending on which jobs you're using, you can hold the triangle button to charge the heavy attack. You can use the R button to eat the bento, and you can use the L button to duck. Then you perform super moves by jumping, then holding down the D-pad and pressing triangle? This is actually my main concern with the controls. They aren't bad, nor does it play bad, but I question their decisions of mapping some actions to some of the buttons. First off, you can also duck by holding down the D-pad or the analog stick, so why designate a button for ducking? Unlike player movement, this is a bad choice for control variety, since in most games, L does not translate to ducking. Next is why should activating the super move need a specific set of inputs? This isn't a fighting game, nor is it trying to incorporate fighting game elements, so why do this? Why are you required first to jump before activating the super move, when some of the super moves don't even involve a downward strike? It's just too specific. It would have been way easier to activate the super move by the press of a single button, and game dev-wise, it would have been easier for the developers to create a super move wherein Gen is not required to jump. Last thing I want to bring up is that did you notice that the circle button does nothing? The developers could have mapped the super move to that button instead. Outside of that though, are there any actual problems with the controls? Honestly, I don't think there is. The controls are okay, they aren't floaty, but at the same time they aren't too tight. There were no times that I died and blamed the controls. There are times that a specific action from a specific job will lock the controls, but I think it has something to do more with the animation of those actions instead. Let's talk about lives. You start with a limited set of lives per level, and are encouraged to finish the stage with a given amount. You lose a life every time he gets hit and dies. The only way for Gen to survive a hit is if he gets a defense up, signified by the hard hat he wears. You can stack a maximum of 2 defense ups. If you lose a life, you can start at a checkpoint in the level, but lose all of your lives, and you have to restart the entire level. This turns a stage run into a survival run. Everything up to now sounds like the standard fare though. What the game does differently is how it handles lives as you transition from level to level. In other games, if you finish stage 1 with 5 lives, those 5 lives carry over to the next stage. Hammerin Hero doesn't do that. Instead, you will always start a new stage with a set amount of lives, regardless of how many lives were left in the previous run. This also means that there are no 1-ups in the game. In my opinion, there are 2 ways to look at this. On one hand, This drives the game's challenge and encourages players to do their best in every run. On the other hand, this makes lives worthless since every time you start a level, it's always the set amount and every time you die, you restart the level. Next topic would be the difficulty. As I mentioned previously, the game can be really challenging at times. It also doesn't help that challenging is the game's standard difficulty. There were times where I had to backpedal and finish a level on easy. In my perspective, the game is difficult because it's an arcade game and nothing else. It's difficult so that it can reduce your lives and make you restart the level. Anyways, there are 4 different levels of difficulty. The difficulty dictates a lot of the game's behavior, including but not limited to your starting amount of lives, whether you start with the defense up, enemy placement, enemy patterns and behavior, and boss health. The game also records if you finish a level at a certain difficulty. This is tied to an unlockable that we'll discuss later. Next are the bentos. Every time you start a level, you are given a choice to visit Kanna. For your first playthrough, I suggest doing so as the bentos are helpful. Kanna will tell you about the ingredients you've gathered and would suggest on what food to make. There are 2 types of bentos, job-changing bento and random effect bento. Job-changing bentos do as the name suggests. It is a specific ingredient to be made, and it lets you change to any job you've unlocked. However, you can't make a bento that changes you to your current job. Aside from letting you change jobs, the bento will also have an additional effect like defense up, power up, double score, etc. The additional effect depends on the ingredients used. For example, the sushi bento lets you change into sushi chef again, and depending on the ingredients you use, will net you a score times 2 or times 3. If you don't want to change jobs but still want the random effects, choose the random one. Now granted, you still need specific ingredients to control what random bonus you get. However, it is random, and I've always had the impression that if you have too many ingredients, you won't be able to manipulate the outcome. Just make sure you have ingredients or else you'll get an oops bento, which is practically useless. I think the bentos are a good idea. You don't normally get a mechanic in arcade games that let you freely change jobs midway through the level. Usually, it's done before entering a level, and even then, you have to depend on timed, one-use item drops to change your job. Also, the bento gives you control of when you want to consume it to change jobs or get a random effect. It's static and it never goes away until you finish the level. I just wish there was a way to choose what bonus you want to have outside of having the right ingredients. Considering that we've mentioned job-changing bentos, let's talk about the job system. Gen has 8 jobs you can play around with. Each job has its own unique charm and quirk, and are presented well enough that you can differentiate them from one another. As cool as this sounds, the job system has one major flaw though. Despite looking different, they don't play different. They all play similarly, and sometimes some jobs are reskins of others. Even if there are some actions specific to a job like the sushi chefs. The Rakugo can also do this as well, minimizing the impact of how cool and social this action is. Even the super moves weren't spared. Let's talk about the super moves while we're at it. Super moves are those that deal a lot of damage. You get a total of 3 chances to use a super move per level, shown by the 3 orange circles. The only way to replenish the counter is by using a bento or picking up an item that does that. Super move counters carry over every time you change your job via a bento. Each job has its own super move, but this statement alone is stretching it, since I just mentioned earlier that even this wasn't the exception. Sure, there are categories into which a super move falls under, but it doesn't feel different because another job does it too, albeit visualized differently. Going back to the jobs, the default job is a carpenter. However, as you finish each level, you unlock more jobs. There are no specific requirements to unlock a job other than finishing the level that unlocks them. Here are the following jobs: carpenter, sushi chef, DJ, diver, slugger, rakugo performer, man in black, and komuso. Now originally, I was planning on discussing all 8 jobs, but upon reviewing and editing the script for this video, I decided against it. For starters, the jobs as I've mentioned play similarly to each other, so it is essentially a repetition of what they are doing, just phrased differently. Lastly, it'll be just a waste of time and effort for the both of us. Instead, just look at this graph that I made quickly categorizing who has similar attacks while I continue on with the commentary. The only exception to the light attack categorization is the Komuso, since his light attack makes him blow a cloud out of his flute, dealing damage to those touched by the cloud. The heavy attack is also a side swing of their weapon or another object. As mentioned earlier, some jobs let you charge their heavy attack, but it still plays similarly for all jobs that does this. Finally, for the super move, like the light attacks, just look at this quick graph I made that categorizes who has similar attacks with who. I find it disappointing that the jobs turn out this way. Visually, they are cute and charming, they stand out from each other, and not one design looks similar to the other. I don't know if this was brought by the controls of the game, since all jobs have to control similarly, but controlling similarly doesn't necessarily mean playing similarly. Remember that the circle button is unused, so it could have been relegated to actual job-specific moves instead. This could have had a lot of potential, but sadly they missed the mark. With the jobs out of the way, let's talk about the levels. Hammerin Hero has a total of 12 stages. The stages aren't long, in fact they're really short, ranging from 2 minutes to 3. Before talking about each level, let's first consolidate what all levels have. First off is that each level has a timer. The timer starts at 99, but don't worry about it, because when you reach certain parts of the level, a certain amount will be added to it. The only way you'll run the timer out is if you don't play the stage. Lastly, each level has a recorded score. There are multiple ways to increase your score for a level. This involves killing enemies and not missing the speech bubbles scattered around the levels. More on those later. Your score also increases at the end of the level depending on the amount of lives you have left, the amount of time left, and the amount of super moves you can do. If you really want to get the highest score possible, make sure to bring bentos that multiply the score values. Now let's start discussing each of the levels. The starting stage is Beranmetang, and from what I can tell, we're in the residential district. The game starts you off outside the streets and decides to tour you around the neighborhood. You enter someone's home, stop a thievery, pass through a cento, help a ramen stand, and you get to the top of a construction site. For a first level, you immediately go through a lot, and this successfully makes the area feel large and wide. Stage 2 is the busy crosswalk. You walk around the business district of the city while fighting Kuromoko along the way. You get to jump over cars, fight a huge machine, and defend said machine if you choose to wake it up. For a short level, you still do a lot, and it does the wacky part of the game right. This level just screams epic. Stage 3 is the manly amusement park, and it successfully feels like one. You get to partake in a carousel and Ferris wheel, the two things that I would immediately think of when you say amusement park. Even though you are fighting for your life in those moments, there is this weird sense of joy in riding them. Also at the end, you get to fight a giant inflated dinosaur. Stage 4 is the Oishi Restaurant District, and it's a surprisingly long level. In this level, you meet Dan Hapa, who will try to stop your progress at certain parts of the level. The level consists of 2 parts, a Chinese restaurant and a sushi restaurant. The obstacles are unique as they make good use of the different things in the environment. A great example are the fire hazard stoves and the Enki sushi chef. You then make your way to the rooftop for the boss fight. Stage 5 is the Turokame TV studio. In this stage, you get to meet Mika, who you have to give pursuit. The path progression for this stage is really cool since you don't just run on the ground. Instead, you get to do some platforming on the lighting equipment hanging around the stage. My main issue for this level is not in the level design, but rather that chasing Mika was a waste of time since you don't even get to fight her. Stage 6 is under Fukiya Bay, my most disliked level. The whole stage is an underwater section, and it exhibits some of the things players complain about such levels. Just a quick note, you're only allowed to play diver again for this section. The level plays out really slow since you're underwater. If you're dropping from a height, you fall down really slowly, and everything feels floaty. Anyways, you start at the city port, and get to dive deeper and deeper in the level. You get a quick mini-boss fight with Dr. Parallel in one section, and after that you get to explore a sunken ship. Stage 7 is the baseball stadium, and if you think that you're in the stands smacking some Kuromoko henchmen, you're wrong. You're actually part of the team and will be playing a really weird form of baseball. The whole level involves running around the bases of the field, and each base has its own obstacles. You end the stage by defeating the boss and scoring the winning point for the team. Stage 8 is the abandoned hospital, and it's full of early 2000s Japanese horror tropes. Because of this, the level successfully achieves the haunting feel. The hospital also feels constricting in some sections. The level is divided into 2 sections. The first part is the upper levels of the hospital, full of enemies that get in your way and are trying to pull a few jump scares. The second part is the basement area, which leads to the boss. Sadly, this part is really short and is a simple hallway. Stage 9 is the Seashell Seashore, the beach area of the city. The level consists of the following areas. First is the beach area, next is a volleyball court with a mini-boss fight. After that is some basic platforming with some boats and floating peripherals. Then you pass through a beach house that gets wrecked by a twister summoned by a ship in the background. Lastly is the port area where you'll fight the boss. Stage 10 is the laughter stage, and calling this a level is a huge stretch. There is no level. No cannon fodders, no platforming, no obstacles. Instead, it's a direct boss fight. The only thing endearing about this stage is you get to perform a joke, but there's no incentive in trying to do this correctly. This level will also be the last that you'll see of Dr. Parallel. Stage 11 is the Kuromoko Gumi HQ. It successfully nails the atmosphere of a rich, albeit evil and greedy corporation. There are a lot of guards in black patrolling the starting area, and there's also a secret basement level that's full of security measures. There's also some platforming to be had via this room with the swing platforms. At the end is a mini-boss directly followed by the fight with Hyosuke. The last stage is in space, specifically 500 kilometers above Earth. You can only play this level using the Teyande X. The Teyande, for the most part, plays similarly to Carpenter again. The only thing different is that it can transform into a plane, and from then it plays like most 2D arcade shooters. For the final level, it's really short. First you save Kanna while avoiding some small meteorites, then you encounter the big one and try to destroy it before it reaches Earth. After that, you get to fight some other mechs before the final boss fight. The main thing I like about the levels is that they were all different from each other despite being numerous. No matter how short they were, having 12 levels for a game is no joke. It felt like I was touring the city, seeing what the city has to offer. It could have easily been just a bunch of houses, buildings, and alleyways, and yet it's not. I like the variety, and I like how you feel you are actually part of the level, not just someone who's striding in. That's not to say that I didn't have problems with the levels. For starters, I have a problem with the level design. A good majority of them felt like hallways moving again from left to right, and there were only a few times where there was platforming or verticality to the levels. Another problem I had with the levels are the cheap enemy placement. There were times that you had to get over an environmental obstacle while having to deal with a swarm of enemies that are in the way. Stage 4, 8, 9, and 11 are the worst offenders about this in my opinion. With the levels out of the way, let's talk about the bosses. They're the usual bosses. They're big and take lots of damage to defeat. They have a variety of attacks and arsenals. I don't have much to say about their designs. None of them look overtly stupid or out of place, but none of them were majorly awe-inspiring. I like the fact that there were a variety of bosses ranging from Kuromoko henchmen to the gigantic Kuromoko machines. The boss fights could have easily been fights with Mika or Danhapa, yet it wasn't. My favorite boss is actually in Stage 5, where you have to fight Kanna's speech bubble. He's not a member of the Kuromoku, there are some platforms involving the fight, and it's a speech bubble. It's the most unique one from all the 12 bosses. Again, that's not to say the bosses don't have any faults. For starters, a bunch of them really devolves down to smacking the enemy continuously. The only boss fights that were like that were the boss fights for stages 5 and 9 because you had to do platforming to be able to hit the boss, and even then, you have to hit specific parts of the boss. There were bosses that you can cheese, and I know that this could be a matter of subjectivity, but at least don't apply it to one of the end stage bosses. These next things I want to bring up are highly subjective, so disregard it if you want to. Number 1. I was annoyed that we didn't fight Mika. As much as I love Kanna's boss fight, it was still infuriating to chase Mika all over the level, only to know you won't be fighting her. It's a waste of time. I know that this one scene may accentuate how quirky and wacky Hammerin Hero is, but this is one of those moments where it falls flat. Number 2. The final fight with Kuromoko was disappointing, and this is further emphasized by the fact that you can cheese his fight. Yes, it was cool that he was inside an R-type, but that doesn't change the fact that his fight was easy and a bit lackluster. Number 3. The last boss fight shouldn't have been with Danhapa. I don't care if he is supposedly our rival. I don't think he's done anything in the game that could give him the position. With the bosses out of the way, the final gameplay element I want to talk about are the speech bubbles. You can find them attached to the NPCs in a level. You interact with the bubbles by hitting them with a light or heavy attack. On the surface, they may look like extra points, but they actually do something. In terms of gameplay, there will be times that the NPC with the speech bubble will help in a fight. Case in point, look at Stage 8 during the mini-boss fight, and Stage 9 at the boss fight. Outside of gameplay, the speech bubbles are a part of a collectible called Thank You Letters, and we'll talk about them later. Just know that if you miss a speech bubble, You won't get its corresponding letters, and sometimes you have to use the right job to be able to get them. This gameplay element is what makes Hammerin Hero unique from its predecessors, and I hope that any anime-like video game would pick this mechanic. It further highlights how cute and charming the game can be, and it helps that the collectible is linked to this mechanic, giving players a reason not to simply brush the collectible off. Before moving on to the collectibles, there is one last thing I want to bring up. If you notice, some items in the level are highlighted in red. It could be an enemy's weapon or projectiles. My main problem with the red highlights is that they are really inconsistent in what they're trying to represent. Sometimes it's something to avoid because it can hurt you. Other times it's something you have to hit to damage the enemy. I just wish that they use different color cues instead of highlighting everything in red, like orange or green. Let's finally talk about the collectibles. There are three main collectibles in the game. First are the souvenirs, which is essentially your peasant trophies for this game. Example souvenirs are those you get by unlocking a job, getting a certain amount of thank you letters, or accumulating more than or equal to a certain amount of points. The second one are the aforementioned thank you letters, which you get by interacting with the speech bubbles in each level. The letters are my favorite collectible in the game because they don't just contain simple thank yous, but actual stories. Stories of the characters in the level. The best example is the letters you get in the restaurant district. We find out that the children of the Chinese and sushi restaurants love each other, but their fathers forbid the relationship. It never took away from the level, but instead quietly added to it. The story wasn't ham-fisted down our throats, nor was it a forced read. Instead, we get to find this out at our own pace. It acts as simple world building for a game and gives background characters life and personality, further adding to the game's charm. The final collectible is the personal file. It's basically the bestiary for this game. It contains data on the enemies that you've been in the level. Enemies you have not defeated or skipped won't have their file unlocked. What makes this file unique though is that it isn't simply comprised of standard enemy data. There's some fun trivia about the enemies via the comments from HR and self-comment area sections. This makes the enemies feel more lifelike rather than simply enemies you have to whack away. Are there any more unlockables for this game? Well, if you look at the jobs menu, you'll notice that I have two missing jobs. According to the last guys I found, the last two spots are for Kanna and Mika. Apparently, you unlock them both by finishing the game in the harder difficulties. Sadly, I can't verify this. For starters, despite there being discussions about the two, I haven't seen any screenshots or videos of people playing Kanna or Mika. Admittedly, I'm also bad at the game. I had to play on easy mode to finish some levels, and I personally think I won't be able to handle the other difficulties without possibly screaming or tearing my hair out, so I apologize for that. Let's briefly discuss the music and sound design. The music is okay. No track sounded god-awful, but no track sounded like the best thing my ear has ever heard in years. Without sounding racist, the best way I can describe the soundtrack is that it's very Japanese. In fact, there were times that it sounded like stuff you'll hear in a slice-of-life anime. Some of the sounds are very appropriate for the stages, and I appreciate how they make use of their country's unique instruments. This game has voice acting, by the way, and regardless of what language you use for the voices, they're really good. Nothing sounded out of place or weird. It's also great that you can choose between English and Japanese voice acting. However, I did notice that a lot of times the Japanese voice acting is overtaken by the volume of the background music. I'm not sure if my recording setup is messed up or if this is how it really sounds like. Here's a quick comparison.
Kyosuke Kotomoku, what are you doing?
As you can see, I'm just convincing people to sell their homes here. I don't have time to be playing with you, boy. The Kuromoku company must set their sublime plan in motion.
A sublime plan?
Oh, apparently I've said too much. Minions, play with the Tamara boy. He's got energy to burn off.
おめえは黒木組の黒木京介そこで何してやがるんで
見てわからんかこの土地から出て行ってもらおうと話し合いをしとるところやこちとらお前に構ってる暇はあらへん我ら建設会社黒木組には崇高な目的があるさかいにな
崇高な目的で
おっと喋りすぎたわい田村のせがれの相手をしてやり随分と血気盛んなようやからな
Other than that, everything's okay. Time to wrap up. Hammerin Hero, despite its flaws, is still a good game. Like I said, the game can be challenging on the standard difficulty, but I think it's manageable. I wish that they spend more time to expand on the stuff that they have because the game has solid foundations. Back then, I considered this game as a hidden gem for the PSP. It just flew under people's radar and considered myself lucky to be able to play this game. My stance on this still hasn't changed, though I admit that the game's numerous flaws may make this decision questionable at best. I recommend this for anyone who has been a fan of Hammerin Harry or for those who love the arcade experience. If you want to pick this up, you'll have to try your best in grabbing a physical copy. As of this video, it isn't present in the PSN store, which honestly confused me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.